Hong Kong's airport has canceled all remaining flights for the second day after violent clashes erupted at the main airport there. The airport's arrival and departures hall were blocked by thousands of protesters who were gathered in the airport for the fifth consecutive day. They're calling for democratic reforms and an independent inquiry into alleged police brutality. Deborah Pata is in Hong Kong with more.
Here at the Hong Kong airport, all flights have been cancelled for a second day in a row. Passengers' plans have been thrown into turmoil. Tensions have really escalated here at the airport, with violence occurring on several occasions. Protesters, after a weekend of serious bloodshed where police stepped up aggressive action against protesters, has seen a rise in suspicion amongst people. What we saw over the weekend was protesters dressed as police officers who then turned on the protesters during the many flash mob style protests that we saw erupting over the weekend. That has led to a lot of suspicion, and we saw that implode here at the airport, where on one occasion protesters believed that there were undercover cops amongst them. In one situation they began beating up that cop very, very badly. We don't actually know if he was in fact an undercover cop or not. Behind me you see them examining items which they believe prove that he was indeed an undercover cop. Then the police came to the airport demanding to be allowed to let in emergency workers to remove the injured from the airport. This particular man who had been beaten up, they claimed that he was just a passenger. Protesters insist that he was an undercover agent. He was then taken from the airport. Protesters have not been dispersed. They continue to stay here. The loudspeaker overhead is urging all passengers to leave the airport with immediate effect. Things are at a standstill, tensions are rising, and this situation is putting protesters on a collision course, not only with the Hong Kong administration, but with Beijing. We're seeing that after nearly 10 weeks, these protests are not abating, but in fact strengthening. And the bloodshed that is occurring is increasing as well. Back to you.
Deborah Pata, thank you, Deborah. BuzzFeed News Asia correspondent Rosalind Adams is at the Hong Kong airport and joins us now. So, Rosalind, can you give us a sense of what the protesters want?
Yeah, the protesters have had 5 demands really since the beginning of since these protests have started in June. They want an extradition bill. They want the extradition bill to be withdrawn. They want people who have been arrested to be released. They don't want people who have been arrested to be classified as rioters. And the government really hasn't given in on these demands, which has really just made things escalate since June.
We're looking at the video of just how intense these clashes have become inside this major international airport. What's the sense going forward? Do we expect more aggressive crackdowns? Do we expect the protesters to be victorious at any point?
You know, it's really turning into a huge standoff. We're not seeing either side back down. You know, the protesters are getting more and more creative. Things started as, you know, a big march through the streets. 2 million people showed up in June. And since then, things have evolved to flash mob protests throughout the city, just taking creative ways to get their statements known. Now we're at the airport. Which is really just a huge symbol of how Hong Kong is part of the global economy, and they want the world to pay attention.
How do these protests differ from the ones that we saw last month in Hong Kong?
I mean, they've evolved radically. Things are moving very quickly. We saw 2 million people march in the street along a planned route. They had police approval. Now what we're seeing, you know, in the last few weeks, police have not approved marches. Protesters are popping up. You know, once tear gas gets fired, they'll move to a different part of the city. The protesters are really thinking on their feet, and they are changing their tactics every few days. They're voting on what's the next step. It's very fluid. The mantra here has become "be water," be very fluid. So this is really like a new, very different thing that we're seeing than what happened in June.
And when you talk about Chinese influence, what's been the reaction from mainland China at this point?
Well, that's also been something that shifted. When protests started in June, there was first censorship of the protests on mainland. Then there was sort of rhetoric about how these protests were caused by foreign interference. And now, most recently on Monday, just yesterday, they've said that, these are signs of terrorism. So the more China ramps up things, and especially as we see these accusations of undercover police officers among protesters, it really is ramping up tensions. Protesters, there's a lot of fear about what's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, but we've been covering this extensively all morning, Rosalind. I want to thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on the ground. Rosalind Adams, thanks again.